Hey everyone, and welcome to another devlog video for the NPC Manager system. Today I want to give you guys a quick preview of the showcase level I've been working on for the past few days. With all of my products, you've seen this before. I like to create a specific level that you can play as soon as you get this, and will kind of give you a tour of all of the main features that you're going to find on whatever asset you're getting. So that's the idea here is you're going to be walking around this path, and as you walk around, you're going to have little messages pop up with some useful information, and hopefully you'll be able to get a good idea just by going through this level of all of the main features that you get here. Uh, the cool thing about doing this is as I'm setting things up on the level one by one, I'm realizing that there are little things that I can do to make things better or more convenient or more flexible. So as part of this process, I've actually been adding some really cool new little features that I want to show you as we're going through this. So yeah, let's go ahead and click play. And I'm going to maximize this. And as you can see, I have some messages like, you move with the WAS, the key. And the first message that pops up is basically saying, hey, welcome, please follow the path. And you're going to see all these new features. And then I start talking about the profile, which is basically the basic concept of the NPC Manager. It's basically a list of tasks that the NPC is going to follow sequentially. And there are different kinds of tasks. POIs are the main ones, the points of interest. And then you have standard tasks. And here we're going to be looking at specifically the different types of tasks. So if I look here at the point of interest, I created a little, I want to say like almost like a little mini house where you can see a cross section. NPCs are walking around, and you can see here when they're sitting on the couch, they spawn their monocles and their top hats because why not? If they sit on this chair here, nothing, there's no props that are popping up here. Some of the NPCs are sleeping here. This separate room is mostly for NPCs to kind of cheer and talk and stand around. You can see this guy here. It's just on the idle station. And here's more representing kind of workstations where the NPCs are going to come here and start hammering and working. And if you come here to the little question mark, then you'll get explanation exactly of what is the POI. Right? You have entrances, you have different stations, and you have spawn points, which is something that I've added, by the way. I've had it in very early code, but I've completely revamped it. So the idea here is that now, as the player approaches a point of interest, on player proximity, the NPCs that are inside the POI are actually going to spawn. And when you leave, and you get really far, the NPCs actually despawn. And again, this is to keep with the idea of performance. You don't want hundreds of NPCs, even if they're far away, to even spawn. Even with the proximity system, spawning NPCs is still costly. So you just want to do it when you get close by. Obviously, this is optional. You don't have to do it that way. So it'll really depend on exactly your use case. But I thought that was a really neat thing to do. So if I actually get far, let me see, I can kind of show you how they despawn. Yep, you can see on the distance they despawn, and then when I get close, they all spawn and they're automatically assigned different stations. So obviously you wouldn't do it so close, you would do it with a bigger trigger, or maybe if there was an actual wall here, like an actual building, then you could make the trigger really close, and only when the player gets really, really close, then you would spawn them. So a lot of flexibility there. You can see this guy shaking all over the place. This is an issue that I still have to really look into it with the nav mesh. Having a lot of these NPCs with more accurate movement really does test how far I can take it with the nav mesh. So this is something that I still need to look into, but I'm aware. Roaming bounce, this is obviously the more simpler movement methods, and again, roaming bounce or nearby bounce, the NPC will look for a specific bounding box nearby. And right now, I've actually added something new. Each bounding box can now have a specific ID. And now you can specify on the NPC's profile a list of IDs that the NPC is allowed to use. And this also works for, you can see waypoint series, also works for the paths. Individual pathways now also have specific IDs, unique IDs. and this is something new. Before, the NPC would spawn, and then it would search for any nearby path, and it would just go to it. But what if you have 5 different pathways nearby? It would just pick a random one. Um, Now you have a lot more control because you have the ability to specify specific paths for specific NPCs, and the same thing is going here for the bounds. So very small change, very simple to add, but in my opinion, very nice addition because it gives you flexibility. If you want a specific path to just be for one specific NPC, now you can do that. You don't have to fidget with the radius of the search and any of that. And this one is just use location. You've seen this before, but this is like the simplest thing. If you don't want to use any pathways or volumes, you just want your NPC to go to a specific location, world location in your level, you can then give the NPC that location, and then it'll just go there and stand there until the task is done. And if you give it more than one location, like in this case, there's an array of locations, it'll pick a random location and go there. So again, useful if you have an NPC with very specific known locations. It's just standing there like a quest giver. Maybe the quest giver can be in one of 3 different locations, right? Every time the game loads, and you can do it this way. It's the least complicated one, and it's just obviously just for that use case. And now we're gonna go into the deep dive of the POVs, the POIs. And you can see here that here now I have like a little more detail. So I talk about the entrances, how each POI can have 1 or more entrances, and the NPC that wants to go to that POI will then go to the nearest entrance. And that's cool because you get to decide how the NPCs go in and out of your POIs. Obviously, if you have a house, obviously you would put the entrances at the doors of the house. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can have like a little park or a plaza or whatever. You can have as many entrances as you want, and the NPCs will just go to the nearest one. Here I talk about the spawners, which you saw earlier. You can have 1 or more spawners inside your POI, and you can specify which NPCs can spawn and the quantity of each NPC class, and then the POI will just spawn the NPCs normally. Here I show kind of the animations similar to the previous setup, like little rooms, and I talk about how each station has an array of animations, and the animations have also the ability to spawn props like hammers in this case. Here I talk about how the stations can be one of 3 types. They can be regular stations, which means that they will be assigned randomly to any NPC that requests a new station. There's no order, there's no connection. It's just a station that is there for any NPC to request. Here I look at the linked stations, and I talked about this before. You can get stations to be linked or connected to each other, and that means that they go in a priority queue. So a station like these that you can see here that are talk stations, you can connect them and say, hey, if 2 stations that are supposed to be linked are filled, then you're going to play the linked animation, which in this case would be NPCs talking. But if it's not filled, then you want to play the idle animation. So here you see that because this station is not filled, this guy is playing an idle animation, but these guys are actually playing talk animations, and you can see how their hands are moving, and that's because both linked animations are filled. So that is a way, and you can see here now that this guy went from idle animation to linked animation, and that's basically allowing you to have NPCs play different animations based on whether those link stations are filled or not. And finally, sequential, and I've shown this again before, and you can see that I have numbers here. Basically, we have 1 or many sequences that you can have in your POI, and NPCs will start the sequence with the first station, and once an NPC starts the sequence, it'll go through the sequence completely. So right now this sequence is occupied, so if another NPC was here, that NPC would not be allowed to go to station 2 or 3 because this NPC right here is going through the sequence. So again, the example that I was given by one of the community members is, say that you're in a bar or a restaurant in your game and you want your NPC to make the line, go and order the food, and then go and sit down and eat and then leave. That is a specific sequence of events, and you don't want the NPC to sit at a table with food and then go order the food, right? That's out of order. So you use this mode of sequential stations to have the NPCs follow a very specific set of actions. And in this case, it's unrelated, but it still gets the point across. So you kind of fix the wall here, then you sit and take a little break, and then you hammer away here. And then you see that when the NPC finishes the sequence, it'll request a new station from POI. And in this case, there's only these three. So the POI will say, okay, well, you need to go back to station number 1, which is the only one open. Notice that the NPC will never go to the second station when it finishes. It's always going to go back to the beginning. Then I'm going to keep going here. And this is the interaction section. And I talk about how NPCs can either interact with each other with dynamic dialogue, or there's a player interaction system, and there's also player damage. And here, if I go here, you can see that Bob and Todd are talking. And right now, I updated the data table, so I don't have the sound clips. They just need to be added. But you can see that Bob and Todd are talking about family. That's kind of like the standard topic. You can say, hey, they're all doing fine, good to hear. And they're basically just talking about family. How's your family going? How's everybody doing? And once they're done, they're going to walk around and leave. If I go to player interaction here, it basically says that any NPC that's roaming around, if you enable it, you can actually go nearby and press E. And you can see here that this guy is now looking at me and rotating towards me. His head is rotating. And I have a little sample box at the bottom that says, hey, this is a sample player dialogue. You can add your own dialogue system via appropriate interface calls. So there's literally 2 interface calls that you would have to use if you want to add your own interaction system. It should be very, very simple to do. This is just a placeholder to show you that you can actually get that done. And finally, you have the player damage here. So obviously, if I hit this guy, not only can they take damage, but there's a little runaway system. You can see this guy is running away. And there's also health regen. So you can specify the percent of HP where the NPC will run away. In this case, it's like 30%. You can see the guy is running away. And there's also HP regeneration. You can see that his HP is regenerating. That is optional. You can tell the NPC not to regen anything, and then the NPC will come back eventually to the same location. And you can hit him again. And again, when he hits that 30%, it'll just run away. So yeah. And the last cool thing is, if you remember, again, look at the dialogue options here. They're just talking about family. How's everybody? And it says, son got the flu last week. I'm sorry to hear. Hope he gets better soon. Blah, blah, blah. Right? So if you go up here, check out what happens here. I'm up here. They're talking about that topic. I'm going to step on this little red button here and see what happens. There's a little explanation here of what happened. You just triggered a massive explosion. You blew up their houses. It says, hey, you accidentally destroyed Bob and Todd's homes. Now go back down and see what they're talking about, and you can see that it's very simple. These 2 structures that were here are now destroyed. So now when I approach these guys, and actually this dialogue is ending. So let's wait for them to start talking again in a few seconds. You can see now the conversation has changed. Says here, did you see that explosion? Yes, my house is gone. What are we going to do now? It says, let's crash on Mike's house. Let's go. And Mike is this guy right here. the point I'm trying to show here is that you can now change the dialogue topics at runtime. Um, so if you have any events that happen in your game, you can now change the dialogue options of the NPCs in that area. So obviously in this case it was just a silly explosion, but any event that happens in your game, now you can say, okay, all of the NPCs in this area, we're going to change the dialogue topics from the standard one to a new one. In this case it was just this explosion one. And then after that, finally I take a look at the other types of NPCs, and they're going to be obviously the static NPCs that you see here. It says, hey, they're just going to be standing around playing random animations. And then the spline crowds that you see here, which in this case is just, as you can see at the end there, they're just disappearing, being teleported to the beginning. So they're on an endless loop. They're only spawned once, so it's very performant. Then I mentioned here that there's the time of day system, and I'm going to have a separate level called level time of day, just to show the entire routine of an NPC from the morning to the night and morning again. And I didn't want to do it here because it's just very hard to do that when you have the time of day changing so quickly. So I'd rather have a separate level where you have a couple of NPCs, or maybe just one, that you can follow around and you can see what he's doing the entire day. And that's pretty much it. Then you get to the ending here to say thank you, thanks for getting the NPC Manager system. Go to YouTube to watch the tutorial series, and also feel free to join Discord if you have any questions. So yeah, last thing I did want to show here is that I've also added a proximity system to the spline crowds here. It probably is not that obvious, but if you look here, as I'm getting farther and farther, eventually you can see that they are hidden, and as I approach them, they appear again. They're not being despawned again. That's an expensive operation, but if the player is far, you can use now a trigger. And I'm going to stop here. And if I select this guy, you can see this trigger right here. And each one has a separate trigger with the option of using the trigger here. And now it's just looking for a player with a tag. So again, more performance options. If you have a specific area in your level when you want crowds to be walking around, there really is no reason whatsoever for those NPCs to be walking around if you're all the way at the beginning of the level. And that was something that I figured, hey, fairly simple to add and definitely much better for performance. So as you're moving through the level, obviously with the regular proximity system, these NPCs will be spawning on proximity. You can see the trigger here, and even while they're spawned, they'll still be subject to the proximity system. So even while they're spawned, they may be disabled or partially disabled. And then once you get out of this completely, the NPCs don't even need to exist. They can just be despawned. And the same thing here. If you're too far from the spline crowds won't even run. So yeah, that's pretty much it for today, guys. Hope you like my little showcase level. I still have to do a few more things for polish. There's still a list of bugs that I'm aware of, so it's not like I'm ready to submit yet, but this is kind of a fun little activity as opposed to trying to do bug fixes. And yeah, thanks to this little setup, I was able to add all these new features. I am hoping to fix all the bugs in the next few days and hopefully submit to Epic soon. There's still some things that I need to add, but I wanted to get that thing submitted as soon as possible. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, or again, if you're not part of the Discord, feel free to join. We have a separate channel for this. I do take all your suggestions very seriously, and even if I can't add it to the initial release, I do have a list of future things that I want to add for post-release. I always have a roadmap with all my products, and if there's something that is really cool that I think I can add, then I'll do that. And if it's something more complex, I'll just write it down and have a big list of all the suggestions, and I may just add it later. So All right. Thank you guys so much. Hope you like where this is going. Let me know again what you think, and I will talk to you in the next video.